Now we will start with the Part 2 program schedules. Firstly, I want to say that if you have completed the grant program schedules in the past, we always had an additional information or optional box at the end of each program schedule where you could enter comments. So to facilitate the review and approval processes, we have removed the additional information section for each of the program schedules. So now we can start with the first schedule within the consolidated application that we recommend for you to complete, and that is the PS 3109, or the Rural Education Program, also known as REAP, Funding Transferability Schedule. There is a resource within the program guidelines that we refer you to have a further understanding of the difference between REAP versus funding transferability. So it's a side-by-side that compares Title V, Part B, Subpart 1, which we call it REAP Flex, or AFWA, which is the Alternative Funds Use Authority, and it compares that with the requirements under Title V, Part A, Funding Transferability. Within the resource, you get a summary, but you also have questions that are answered within the resource as far as who can actually exercise each one of those flexibilities, what funds are eligible for the flexibility, how may LEAs exercise the flexibility while spending the eligible funds, what rules apply to the funds. Does an LEA need to receive funds under a given program in order to spend eligible funds under the program? What are LEA's responsibilities for providing equitable services under this authority? And what steps does an LEA need to take to exercise this flexibility? So when you get into the PS 3109, this is what the schedule looks like. There's a Part A and Part B. Part A is your REAP section. The LEA needs to be eligible for REAP to utilize this flexibility. The funds do not transfer, but may be used for local activities authorized under ESSA. Funds are not subject to all rules and requirements. LEAs do not have to receive funds under a program to spend Title II Part A or Title IV Part A funds on an allowable local activity. LEAs must provide equitable services relative to Title II Part A or Title IV. LEAs must reserve for the benefit of PMP and teachers. Funds for PMP need not be expended under the same programs as for local public schools and should serve to meet the needs of PMP. And the eligible programs are Title II. You can do REAP from Title II Part A and Title IV Part A into Title I Part A, Title II Part A, Title III Part A, LEA and Immigrant, Title IV Part A, and Title IV Part B, 21st Century. Now, how do you know whether or not you're REAP eligible? when I went over the resources, one of the resources on grant opportunities is a report that will show you whether or not you're REAP eligible. Or another way to look at it is if you are eligible to receive the Small Rural Schools Achievement Program, you are considered REAP eligible. Even if you don't apply for the program, as long as you're eligible for SRSA, you are considered REAP eligible. Okay, now how do you complete the REAP Part A or the REAP section of the PS 3109? If an LEA does not apply for Title II or Title IV, the system will automatically gray out the row for the respective program. If LEA does apply for Title II or Title IV and is not eligible to exercise REAP Flex, or is eligible to exercise REAP Flex but elects not to participate, the LEA selects the does not apply checkbox for each applicable fund source. So for this example, they're not going to apply for, they have Title IV, but they're not going to exercise REAP Flex for Title IV. If the LEA does apply for Title II or Title IV and is eligible to exercise REAP Flex, the LEA elects to participate. LEA enters the percentage from the respective program to the receiving program for each program where the LEA exercises REAP Flex. The total cannot exceed 100%. So in this example, they did 90% from Title II into Title I and 10% from Title II to Title III. So that would equal the 100%. You notice here, even though one flexibility that you have for REAP Flex is you do not have to receive funds under a program to spend funds to spend Title II or Title IV funds on an allowable activity. You can see under the funding transferability, since this flexibility does not apply, you can see that Title III Part A ELA is grayed out because they did not apply for Title III. But for REAP Flex, you can flex money into Title III Part A ELA if the LEA is eligible for REAP Flex. Reminder that the purpose of REAP Flex is to offer that flexibility for our small rural schools that may not have other funds available in order to run a particular program. If the LEA exercises both REAP Flex and funding transferability for each program, the total cannot exceed 100%. Okay, now we'll go over funding transferability, which is Part B. All LEAs are eligible to exercise funding transferability. When an LEA exercises funding transferability, those funds become funds of the program to which they are transferred and are subject to the rules and requirements of the program. LEA may only transfer eligible funds into the program the LEA has applied for on the ADC. Funds remain in the original fund source and are reported as expenditures under the original fund source. It is the use of funds that is redirected. LEAs must provide equitable services based on the funds remaining after the transfer. LEA cannot reserve Title II or Title IV funds solely to provide equitable services. LEAs must conduct timely and meaningful consultation with a private school, modify campus or district improvement plans to reflect the transfer, and notify TEA of the transfer 30 days before the transfer effective date, before transferring the funds. Applicable programs are, again, Title II and Title IV. And the receiving programs are Title I Part A, Title I Part C, Title I Part D, Title II Part A, Title III Part A, ELA and Immigrant, Title IV Part A, and Title V Part B, Rural and Low-Income Schools. And that must be, they must have been eligible, or they must be eligible for RLIS and must have applied for RLIS in order to exercise that flexibility into Title V Part B. Okay, how do you complete this section? If the LEA does not apply for Title II or Title IV, the system will automatically gray out the row for the respective program. If the LEA does apply for Title IIA or Title IVA and elects not to participate in funding transferability, then the LEA will select that they does not apply checkbox for each applicable fund source. If the LEA does apply for Title II Part A or Title IV and elects to participate in funding transferability, the LEA enters percentages from the respective program to the receiving program. And then for each program, the LEA exercises funding transferability. The total cannot exceed 100%. So for the purposes of this example, we brought in what this LEA had done they were under REAP Flex. So they exercised REAP Flex under Part A. And now under Part B, since under Part A, they did not do Title IV Part A, they are doing funding transferability 100% of Title IV into Title I. If the LEA exercises both REAP Flex and funding transferability for each program, the total cannot exceed 100%. So there was 100% under Title IIA under REAP Flex, and they did 100% for funding transferability for Title IV. You are not required to do 100%, you just cannot exceed 100%. Now, there are those dependencies that we mentioned earlier on PS 3109 to some of our program schedules. So exercising funding transferability impacts the available funds to the program that the funds are being transferred to. In the funds available section under the program schedule, you will see a section that will have what your current allocation of funds are. And those current year allocation does not include any reallocation or carryover amounts. Sorry, I went too fast. So when you do funding transferability, you will see what the impact of what that funding transferability amount has on this schedule, on your program schedule. This will affect Title I Part A or your PS 3101, your Title II Part A schedule, which is PS 3104, and your Title IV Part A schedule or your PS 3107. The amount that is actually transferred will show up on the program schedule, and it'll calculate what that total allocation and transfer amounts are. So another thing that we have found is on your PS 3109, because there is no validation, is if you're doing funding transferability and or REAP, if you say it does not apply on your PS 3109, when you complete your Title II Part A schedule, which is your PS 3104, Title II Part A, or your PS 3107, Title IV Part A, on the PS 3109, ensure that if you say does not apply, that means you will be required to complete your program schedules. So in your program schedule, if you have does not apply on PS 3109, the checkbox at the top of the program schedule that says the LEA has redirected 100% of Title II, Part A, or Title IV using REAP and funding transferability. So that's wrong. So you will get we will communicate with you that either you have to edit your PS 3109 to show what those funding transferability amounts are, or in the reverse would be that you would complete your program schedules to truly reflect what's on your PS 3109. So the correct way would be that if you're going to do funding transferability and when you complete your program schedules, you do 100% of either Title II or Title IV, this is when you would actually select that does not apply. I mean, the LEA has redirected those funds on your program schedules. Now we're going to talk about the prior year data that are available on your PS 3109 sections. It's parts C and part D. Part C and part D are not available on your original submission of your application. The LEA will submit an amendment once the carryover amounts, if any, populate on your PS 6001. This process normally occurs in the spring. This allows the LEA the ability to let TEA know that what their intent is with carryover funds. Then once carryover funds are available on the BES 6001 or your budget schedule, and LEA has carryover funds in Title II-A or Title IV-A, the prior year section will populate with a PS 3109 data from your prior year application. So for the purposes of 25-26, it will populate with the amounts from your 24-25 consolidated application. This was new to the 24-25 consolidated application, and that will also be there for your 25-26. So this will be the second year that we utilize this section of the PS 3109. And how to complete section C and D are available when the carryover amount is populated on the BS 6001. So on the 6001, there is a carryover, or your carryover amounts are populated on line 4, which says carryover. And the prior year data populates on only for the fund sources where there is a carryover amount greater than 0. So in this example, there is carryover amount in Title II Part A, but 0 in Title IV Part A from the prior year. So for Title II Part A, the options are you can leave it at 50%. Last year, they had 50% for Title II into Title I. And then since there is no carryover for Title IV, the Title IV was at 100%, and that is grayed out. So the option is for the 50% to leave it as it is, or they can increase that amount from at 50%. They can increase for Title I Part A, but they cannot decrease. For any of the other if there were any other programs available that had a carryover amount that they transferred to, they would be able to just either increase or decrease. Title I Part A is the only program that will not allow you to decrease. For Title IV Part A, there are no options available since there was no carryover amounts. Now I'll turn it over to Lenitra Guess.
Good morning. I am Lenitra Guess, and I am the PNP Ombudsman for Private Nonprofit School Equitable Services. This is the PS 3099 Private Nonprofit Equitable Services Part 1. And so on this schedule, you will see that all LEAs must complete Part 1. It is recommended that you complete PS 3109, the REAP funding transferability schedule that Dee Dee was speaking about prior to completing the PS 3099 schedule. Equitable services do not apply to charter schools. For the Part 1, all the LEAs must check yes or no on private schools being located within their district boundaries, or if there are Title I Part A services that are being provided in the public school, then the LEA must respond yes or no if there are any Title I Part A eligible students that might attend private nonprofit schools that are located outside of the boundary. Part 1B is where the LEA must indicate a response for each of the programs in which they have received funding. So for Title I Part A, C, 2A, 3A, English learner or immigrant, and Title IV Part A, all of those programs must be checked yes or no if there are any private schools that plan to participate in any of those programs. And then Part C, those are the assurances that the LEA must assure to and have supporting documents for those assurances in boxes C1 and C2, that it has discussed all consultation requirements, and that it also assures the affirmation of consultation will be provided if there are private schools that are participating with any of the equitable services. If there are not private schools participating with equitable services, the LEA would not submit any affirmation of consultation forms. Part 2 is the section for Title I Part A. The LEA will enter the low-income ages 5 through 17 for the public school, as well as indicate who are the number of eligible low-income students that are attending private schools. And those students must reside in a Title I attendance area. The LEA would also select one of the 4 options on how they are, what method they're using for determining low-income status. If a private school does not wish to share any information that would help the school determine low income information for the Title I Part A program, it may not participate in equitable services for Title I Part A. The LEA would only select one poverty method that they are using for all of the private schools to get that low income amount. If selected, Part 2A, line 10, which is the administration of Title I Part A, it must match your PS 3101 Part 1C, line 5. On both schedules, you should have the total amount that is set aside for administration for Title I Part A equitable services. For Part 2 of the Title I Part C migrant program, in line 1, the LEA would enter the identified migrant students ages 3 through 21 for the public school, as well as the enrollment for the participating private schools. That will help to generate any equitable services amounts for private schools that would be receiving migrant services, and that is only eligible for those private schools that are located within the boundary of a public school that has a Title I Part C migrant allocation. For the Title II Part A program, the LEA would complete Part C if there are any participating private schools that want to participate. On this schedule, the private school would enter the student enrollment for the public school and private school of those students ages 5 through 17. Title II-A services may be used for all PMP staff within that participating private school. Again, only those schools, private schools that are located within the boundaries of the LEA are eligible to receive Title II Part A services for their staff. In line 8, if there is an amount reserved for direct administration, then the LEA would enter that amount there, and then the system would calculate the Title II Part A private school reservation for equitable services. For Title III Part A, English Language Acquisition, the LEA would enter the total identified EL students in the public school as well as in the private school, and those are going to be for students ages 3 through 21. If a school does not receive a Title III, or if an LEA does not receive a Title III Part A grant, this table will be grayed out. If there is equitable services that if there are direct administration that the LEA needs to reserve, it is capped at 2%, and that amount would go on line 8, and the remaining schedule will be calculated for equitable services for those students that are English learners, and it would only be for those private schools that are located within the district boundaries. Title III Part A immigrant students, that grant is very similar. You will enter ages 3 through 21 as an LEA at the public school, and any identified immigrant students ages 3 through 21 for the private school. The private school must reside within the boundaries of the LEA. On line 8, as it was with the English learners Title III, you would enter any reservation for direct administration, and then the schedule would calculate the amount for Title III Part A immigrant equitable services. Title IV Part A, the LEA would enter the amount of the number of student enrollment ages 5 through 17 for the public school as well as the private school. And then they would also enter on any administration that is reserved on line 8. And I will make that change on here. It says line 7, but actually line 8 is the LEA reservation amount. And now I will turn it over to Vivian.
Good morning. I'm going to walk you through the PS 3101, which is the Title I Part A Reservation of Funds section. In Part 1, if the LEA has chosen to reap data or has chosen to reap funds from Title II Part A or Title IV Part A into Title I, then those amounts will be reflected in Part 1A. If the LEA has chosen to use the funding transferability option from Title II-A or Title IV-A into Title I, those are going to be reflected in or in Part 1, Section B. This amount in Part B plus the Title I allocation amount is what will be used to calculate the percentages in Part C of this schedule. So what we did last year, this is the second year we've done this. The way the activities are organized in Part C for the reservation of funds, the first 4 items are for activities that are required of LEAs if they're applicable. So we'll go through these each one at a time. So the line 1 is for the district-wide parent and family engagement activities. LEAs with a Title I Part A entitlement that exceeds $500,000, they're required to reserve at least 1% for parent and family engagement activities. So for those LEAs that have more than $500,000 in an entitlement, they will not be able to click not applicable because they are required to reserve the 1%. LEAs that have a smaller entitlement may reserve funds under this line, or they may check the not applicable box, whichever is applicable to them. Line 2 is for services to homeless students. All LEAs are required to reserve some Title I Part A funds to serve homeless students. So the NA box is not applicable for this particular line. The LEA must document that they have determined the amount to be reserved based on need. We have created a worksheet that will assist homeless students in determining this amount so that they can have that worksheet as documentation for how they figured out how much they needed to reserve. The LEA doesn't have to use that worksheet. They can use some other form of documentation, but we have provided this to assist LEAs in figuring out what that amount is. And I'm going to turn this over to Nellie now to talk about the post-award compliance review that's associated with this particular reservation.
Thank you, Vivian. Hi there, everyone. My name is Nellie Nino. I am part of the post-award compliance unit under the Federal Fiscal Compliance and Compliance and Reporting Division. And as Vivian mentioned in the previous slide, completing the entry for the Part C, Line 2 homeless reservation has a new requirement. This new requirement is in response to USDE's monitoring visit of TEA. For this newly incorporated requirement, the post-award compliance team will review a 25% random sample of ESSA applications post-award. That means after you've received your NOGA. And the sample of grantees will be asked to submit the completed homeless student reservation worksheet or an equivalent. During our post-award review of the app, the post-award compliance team will be using the homeless student reservation worksheet or its equivalent to compare the amount entered on line 2 of the PS 3101 here against the budget and programmatic details. And just for your own information, the worksheet that's indicated twice here in the slide are both live links for your use directly to that worksheet.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nellie. Okay, so then proceeding on with the other requirements that are for the reservation of funds. Line 3 is for services to students who are residing in local facilities for the neglected. If the LEA has a local facility for neglected children that is located within its boundaries, then part of their Title I Part A entitlement was based on the number of children who were residing in that facility during the previous year's or previous October. So they would have been reported by the LEA as having resided at the facility on the prior year's SC 9000. That's a special data collection that collects information related to students who are residing in local facilities for the neglected. So because that amount is generated by the students who were residing at that facility, to keep that portion of the entitlement, the LEA is required to provide Title I Part A services to the students at that facility, whether that is through a reservation of funds, which would be reflected on this schedule on line 3, or whether that is through a campus allocation, which would have been indicated on the PS 3102, which Gerardo will talk to you about in a little bit. So in some fashion, the LEA has to provide services to students residing at that local facility for the neglected, either through a campus allocation, if the LEA is operating a campus at the facility, or through a reservation of funds, if the LEA is simply providing services to students at that facility. The fourth requirement for the reservation of funds is for Title I Part A services to eligible private school students. This is for the equitable services amounts that were generated on the PS 3099 that Lenitra talked to you about earlier. So this is going to be in two parts. The equitable services requirement is for the direct services to students. So this would not include administrative costs. Administrative costs are going to be on the allowable or the authorized reservations that we'll talk about in just a minute. So lines 5 through 12 on this schedule are what we call authorized activities. So they're not necessarily required under the statute, but they are allowable under the statute. They're specifically mentioned as things that are allowable through a district reservation. So line 5 is where you would record any direct administrative costs that the LEA was incurring to provide the equitable services to the eligible private school students. This is going to be the amount that's calculated on the PS 3099 in Part 2, line 10. Line 6 is for direct administrative costs for the Title I Part A program that doesn't include the equitable services. So this would be the direct administrative costs for the Title I Part A program at the public schools. It would include the direct administrative costs for the Title I Part A student or Title I Part A program for students at the facilities for the neglected or the delinquent. Line 7 is for the program, for the services that are being provided to local facilities for delinquent children. It is not a requirement that LEAs use Title I Part A funds for services to delinquent students. The LEA, if it has a facility for the delinquent within its boundaries, it's going to have generated Title I Part D Subpart 2 funds. So the LEA could be providing services to these students through the Title I Part D Subpart 2 program. However, it is allowable for the LEA to use Title I Part A funds to provide additional services to these students who are residing in facilities for the delinquent. And so if that is the case, the LEA would do that through a reservation of funds. Line 8 is for LEAs that reserve Title I Part A funds to support early childhood education services to low-income students who are below the age of compulsory school attendance. So if the LEA is providing support to those programs, they must ensure that the services that they provide comply with the performance standards that are established under Head Start. The LEA is also required to have agreements with these other agencies. So whether it is a Head Start agency that's providing these services, or whether it is an other early childhood education, early childhood development program through another agency, the LEA has to have an agreement, a written agreement with those facilities. We are in the process of creating a template that will assist LEAs in ensuring that they have the required items addressed in these particular agreements. There is also non-regulatory guidance that's available from the U.S. Department of Education that is available through the link that is provided here on this slide. Line 9 is for LEAs who wish to use Title I Part A funds to provide financial incentives and awards to teachers who are serving students who are in Title I schools that have been identified for school improvement. There is a percentage limitation on this. LEAs may reserve not more than 5% of their Title I Part A funds to provide these financial awards and financial incentives and awards to teachers. So those are for teachers who are working in schools that have been identified for comprehensive support and improvement activities, or for targeted support and improvement activities under the school improvement section of Title I. Line 10 is for LEAs to reserve funds to provide support to other school improvement activities under the either the comprehensive support and improvement, the targeted support and improvement, or the continued support and improvement section of the Title I statute. Line 11 is for coordinated services. This is a little bit of a catch-all area. It incorporates some of the things that perhaps the LEA had been accustomed to lining out in other sections when we had the previous incarnation of this particular schedule. It would include things like Title I Part A summer school. If the LEA was operating that at the LEA level for Title I schools district-wide, it would put that under now in the coordinated services line. Additionally, another area that could be part of this would be for professional development for Title I Part A teachers. So if the LEA had teachers on school-wide campuses or teachers on targeted assistance campuses who were working with the students who had met the LEA's established criteria for receiving services under targeted assistance, that professional development would go under a coordinated services line. And the last line that we have here is for foster care transportation. LEAs that receive Title I Part A funds are required to collaborate with the state or local child welfare agency to ensure that transportation for children in foster care is provided, arranged, and funded. There are several different models that can be used for that. And we've provided a link to the USDE's non-regulatory guidance so that you can have the guidance that the USDA has provided related to providing the transportation for students in foster care. So for any of these activities that the LEA is going to reserve funds, they would use, you would use the first column here to enter the amount that you're reserving from the current year entitlement. The percentage column is going to automatically calculate. The unexpended funds from prior year reservation, this column is not going to be available for any kind of entry on the original application. This column is going to open up once the carryover amounts are calculated, usually at the end of February of the following year. So you would see this column open up in February of 2026 when the carryover funds are calculated. For the items that have a required reservation, such as the parent and family engagement and the private school equitable services, those amounts have a calculated minimum. If the LEA does not spend or did not spend in the prior year the amount that was required for that program, the LEA would be expected to carry over in this second column for lines 1 and line 4 what that unexpended obligation was from the prior year, so that during the current year, the LEA would be expected to spend what is in the current year reservation plus what is in the unexpended funds from the prior year. But again, this last column will not open up until carryover amounts are calculated. Okay, now I'd like to spend a little bit of time on the SC 5000, the Title I Part A campus selection schedule. Because there's no way that I can actually talk about all of the things that go into this particular schedule during the time frame that we have in this training. I do want to invite you to attend a virtual training that we are having related to the campus eligibility and the SC 5000, as well as the Title I Part A campus allocation determinations. We will be having a 3-hour training to cover both of these topics on June 10th from 9 to noon. And you're able to register at the link that is shown here on this slide. So although I'm going to go over the schedule, it really needs to have a little bit more attention to it than we're able to give during the current time frame. If you're wanting more information before the June 10th training, there are video resources that are available currently online. We recorded last year's training related to the Title I Part A campus eligibility and the Title I Part A campus allocations, and those video resources are already available on our website. These links are live so that you can reach them if you're wanting to have them. It probably would be a great idea for you to view these resources and attend the June 10th training. The subjects are kind of complicated, and it can do you a lot of good to hear it more than one time. So if you have questions after viewing the resources, maybe it'll be more clear when we do the training, or if you still have questions after that, then you can ask more directed questions if you have that kind of background already available. So anyway, before starting your SC 5000 schedule, before even trying to complete it, we advise that you create a spreadsheet to capture certain information to help facilitate completing the schedule, because you're going to have all this information sort of at your fingertips to be able to make the schedule completion not just like super complicated. So on your spreadsheet, you're going to want to have for each campus, you're going to want to have the total number of students enrolled, or if you're using residing data, then you can use that data, but the total number of students enrolled, the total number of low-income students at each campus, and you're going to want to go ahead and calculate the low-income percentage. So you take the total of low-income students and you divide it by the total number of students enrolled, and you'd come up with a low-income percentage for each campus. So you're going to want to you'll want to be able to enter the low income percentage on the SC 5000. For your sanity, you probably want to sort your spreadsheet by low income percentage while you're figuring out which campuses you're going to make Title I eligible. If you only have 2 or 3 campuses, this is not such a big, huge deal. But if you've got anywhere like more than 5 or 6 or 10 campuses, you're going to want to sort this by low income percentage so that you can see your campuses in rank order. It's a whole lot easier to be sure that you're not skipping them as you determine which campuses you're going to serve, because you're going to want to figure out which campuses are Title I eligible. So that's going to be down to either 35% or down to the district average, whichever's lower. You're going to want to determine which campuses can be school-wide eligible, which ones you want to serve as school-wide campuses. Generally, the threshold for that is at 40%, although there are waivers available to go lower than that. And you're going to want to be able to indicate what the campus status is. So you're going to want to say whether it is school-wide or targeted, whether you are skipping the campus. In other words, you're serving campuses that are lower than that campus in rank order, or if you are not serving the campus. If you have this information before you are filling out your SC 5000, it will be a little bit easier. So now we're going to go through the SC 5000 and see how it works. There is a resource that may be useful to you. There's a Title I Part A Campus Selection and SC 5000 Handbook. In Part A, the LEA name will pre-populate. You will have to type in the LEA's low income percentage. So that's the low income percentage for the LEA as a whole. So you'll take the total number of low income students in the LEA and divide it by the total enrollment in the LEA, and that will give your total low income percentage. The total enrollment for the LEA is a field that's going to auto-calculate based on the information that the LEA puts in the rest of the schedule for each campus. So as you complete the campus information, this number for total LEA enrollment is going to change. Sorry, I can't do anything about sneezes. Okay, so for example, I think we fill this out. So you have example ISD. I type in the 42.35% low income percentage, and truly you should go ahead and carry out your low income percentages to 2 decimal places. That lets there be usually no question about ties in terms of whether a campus is higher or lower than another campus. Usually by the time you go out to 100th position, there's a clear delineation between campuses. Okay, so now we're going to look at Part B. Part B is the LEA's campus list. The campus list is pulled from Ask TED. The information about the campus name, the campus number, and the grade span is going to be pulled from Ask TED. Now, this is the LEA's opportunity to use the copy prior year data from the prior year application. But understand that only certain things are going to be pulled from last year's application. They will pull the basis of eligibility, which is the second column. They will pull this campus status, which is this column over here in the middle. And they will pull the information about consolidated funds from the prior year application. Now, if the LEA copies prior year data and wants to change it, that's certainly an acceptable thing. So if you pull the data and you think, oh no, I want to do it differently this year, then the LEA has the option to change that campus by campus. But understand that if the LEA has started to complete the application with data and then say, oh no, I want to copy prior year data, when you copy the prior year data, what you'd already put in is going to get overwritten. So you want to be judicious about when and if you want to use the copy prior year data button. It's a useful tool, but it can also sort of be a pain. So you want to be able to, if you're going to use it at the right time. Also understand that the campus enrollment data and the campus low income data will not be copied, even if you use the copy prior year data button. That's because the campus enrollment and the campus low income percentage changes from year to year. Okay, so it really doesn't matter what last year's was. What matters is what this year's is. And so that's why the LEAs are required to enter the campus enrollment and the campus low income percentage each year. Okay, so we do have a suggested order for completing the data for each campus. So we would suggest that you would put in the campus enrollment first, that you would enter the campus low income percentage next, because please note that we do not actually collect the number of low income students. That's why the LEA is advised to create its own spreadsheet, enter the enrollment data, enter the campus low income data, and calculate the low income percentage, because what you're going to put on the schedule is the enrollment and the low income percentage. We don't actually capture the number of low income students here. That's maintained by the LEA at the local level. The third thing would be the basis of eligibility. We'll talk about each one of these things as we go along. This is just the recommended order. Then you will enter the additional Title I eligibility if that's applicable. And again, we'll talk about this a little bit more in detail. The campus status would be the next thing that you would want to complete. Whether the campus had additional school-wide eligibility issues. So if your campus status was going to be school-wide program and the LEA was lower than 40%, they would need to enter some additional school-wide eligibility. So you'd have to say whether it was based on a school-wide EdFlex waiver or whether it was school-wide the previous year. If it was a targeted assistance campus, the LEA would need to enter the number of low-income students that it anticipated serving on that targeted assistance campus. Because obviously, if it's targeted assistance, the LEA can't serve everybody. That would be like a school-wide program. The LEA can't even serve all of a grade. They would need to be identifying students who are most at risk of failing. And then the LEA would determine whether they were consolidating funds on a school-wide program. So if it was a targeted assistance campus, this wouldn't be an issue, but if it's going to be a school-wide program, they would need to indicate how they were consolidating funds on the school-wide program. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. And the other issue would be last, if there was any other piece of information that the LEA needed to tell us about a particular campus. Okay, so let's do a little bit of an example. So like for each campus, here on our example, we have Sample Elementary, and their total enrollment at Sample Elementary is 527 students. The enrollment at Example Middle School is 651 students. And we enter the low income percentages for each of these campuses. And we're going to select the basis of eligibility for each of these campuses. So if we were using residing, we would use that. This is a drop-down menu. So these are the things that the LEA would pick from. So it would be residing, enrollment, feeder pattern, optional method, direct certification, or none. So for each of these campuses, then we would also select the additional Title I eligibility. So for example, this is also a set of radio buttons that the district can pick from. If the LEA was needing to use a one-year transition, meaning that they had dropped out of Title I eligibility altogether, and the LEA was invoking the one-year transition option to have one more year to transition this campus from a Title I campus to a non-Title I campus, they would indicate that they were using the one-year transition option. If the LEA was using a grade span grouping, to say, okay, I'm going to serve I'm going to serve my middle school campus group first. So I'm going to group my campuses by grade span. They would use that particular one. If the LEA was qualifying a campus using an individual EdFlex programmatic waiver, they would use that as an option. Let me say right now that nobody in the state has an individual programmatic waiver under EdFlex right now, so this would probably not be something that you were doing unless you are already knowing that you are in the process of developing that waiver application and are about to submit it. Okay, so like nobody has one right now. Or if there are no additional Title I eligibility issues that need to be considered, the LEA would select none. So in this particular case for this campus for Sample Elementary, they're obviously eligible because they're over 75%. We have none of these issues because you can't group by grade span over 75%. We don't need an EdFlex waiver. We don't need 1-year transition, so it's a none. Likewise, for the example middle school, it's obviously above 35%. I don't need any of these additional eligibility issues, so it's a none. Then I'm going to select the campus status. So it's either going to be school-wide or targeted assistance, not served, or skipped. So in this particular example, we're selecting school-wide for Sample Elementary. We're selecting targeted assistance for example middle school. Okay, so now for each campus, if it's school-wide, I need to indicate if either of these two options is being invoked. So it's above 75%, so I don't need an EdFlex waiver. I don't have to establish the school-wide status from the previous year, so I'm not going to select either of those. For every campus that I have selected as a targeted assistance campus, however, I need to indicate the number of students who are served on that campus. So, for example, I'm indicating here on my targeted assistance campus that has an overall campus enrollment of 651. I'm identifying 29 students who are going to be served in a targeted assistance program. Okay, so let's talk for a second about this last column over here, the consolidated funds column. For each school-wide campus, I need to talk about what funds are going to be consolidated in that school-wide campus budget, whether that's going to be Title I Part A only, whether that's going to be Title I Part A and some other federal funds, whether that's Title II, Title IV, other federal funds can be consolidated on a school-wide campus budget to upgrade the entire education program. If that's going to happen, all of those fund sources that are being included in that consolidated school-wide budget need to be indicated as such on this inside the school-wide program plan. So the campus needs to specifically write out, I'm consolidated Title I Part A, Title II Part A, Title IV Part A in my school-wide campus budget. And in that case, they would select here federal funds only. If they were including those federal funds plus state comp ed plus some local funds, then they would indicate the federal, state, and local category. And I wanted to point out right here, sometimes people get confused about consolidating funds in a school-wide campus budget and consolidated administrative funds. Those are two separate issues. Consolidated administrative funds happens at the LEA level for administrative funds. Funds that are consolidated on a school-wide campus happen on each individual school-wide campus. So they're two totally separate issues. So here on this particular school-wide campus, we're going to indicate that it's school-wide or that it's Title I funds only. So that's what I'm going to indicate here. Okay, so for Part C, once the LEA has completed Part B and figured out which campus it's serving how, it's going to be required to indicate that it accepts certain assurances. So if it has indicated school-wide campuses are being served, the LEA was required to indicate that it accepts the school-wide campus assurances. If it is operating any targeted assistance campuses, the LEA would be required to accept the targeted assistance assurances. If the LEA is skipping any of the campuses, that means they are like, if they have a campus above 75% and they're going to drop down and serve campuses that are 74%, but they're not going to serve the campuses that were above 75%, they're going to have to skip those campuses. There are certain assurances that the LEA is making in those situations. Likewise, if they are using an EdFlex waiver to establish school-wide eligibility, there are assurances related to that. If they are serving any campuses below 35% poverty, there are assurances related to the special 125% special allocation rule that kick in. Each of these assurances in all of these categories is lined out inside the SC 5000 handbook on pages 23 and 24. So that is a resource that you can refer to for more detail on that. Then in Part D, related to supplement, not supplant, the LEA is required to have either a Title I neutral methodology for distributing its state and local funds to its campuses, or it is required to have a valid statement of exemption. Each of those is described in the Supplement Not Supplant handbook. There are trainings related to each of those topics that are available, also recorded online. And if you want to discuss your particular situation, you're welcome to email me and we can talk offline about any of that. And I'll turn it back over to Jaime to send us to a break.
Hello. This is Gerardo Ramirez. I'm the Title I Part D Program Director, and I'll be walking you through the PS 3102, which is the schedule for the Title I Part A neglected and the Title I Part D Subpart 2. All right, so just to start with a little bit, when we talk about the Title I Part D program, we, as you have heard us before, we talk about the ESSA law, and within that law, we have the establishment of the Title I Part D. And there we are given different definitions that we must abide in order to be able to perform the work within this program. So we have the definition for neglected, delinquent, and at risk. It's important to note that facilities need to meet the intended definition as it is in statute. And so here we have the two different definitions for neglected and delinquent. So the main thing to know between the two is that they sound similar. For neglected, you have public or private residential facility other than a foster home that is operated for the care of children who have been committed or placed by state law due to abandonment, neglect, or death of parents or guardians. And for delinquent, we have is a public or private residential facility other than a foster home for the care of children who have been adjudicated to be delinquent or in need of supervision. So the main thing here is that when it comes to Title I Part D Subpart 2, the facility needs to be meeting the definition of delinquent. And for that, we have youth that have been adjudicated. And what that means is that typically a judge is involved. And so that you may have pre-adjudication centers or facilities, and you have also kiddos that are serving the sentence in a facility too. When it comes to neglected, we have other than it's not a foster care facility, and we have kiddos that have been placed there either to abandonment, neglect, or death of parents. So when you get to the schedule on the PS 3102, we have a couple of things that we would like to cover. First, we see that if you have completed the SC 9000, which is the student annual count, you will have facilities that are pre-populated on that first line. For state agencies, that will be this SC 9010. And so that will be the same thing when it will be the data that whatever was submitted on those special collection tools, it will be pre-populated here. Then something that was sort of new last year, and then we kind of have been implementing it, is this focus on Title I Part A participation. So we're gonna be covering just a little bit more in depth what that will look like, especially moving from what my colleague Vivian covered earlier in the slides. So we have, here's a look into a more in-depth for the participation Title I Part A. So what this means is that the LEA may provide services that are comparable under Title I Part A to a facility who is either neglected or delinquent. Now, earlier, you might heard that there's a reservation and that kind of stuff on the Title I Part A. So if the facility is a neglected facility, the LEA must provide reservations either through the LEA reservation or the campus allocation. If, however, the facility has declined services, meaning they don't want Title I Part A services, then at that point, they can select no and check the box where it says decline services. If the facility is a delinquent facility, then at this point, Title I Part A services are optional. And the LEA might respond no, which is, if you see my cursor at the top, and check the box of decline services. So I know it looks a little bit different because I've received sort of a question saying, well, we didn't offer for delinquent, but remember that it's just, no, it's still there. For decline services, it's more specific for when we talk about neglected facilities. So what does it mean moving forward? If you select the LEA reservations, then that will check a trigger. It will basically check if you have made a reservation on line 3 for neglected facility only on the PS 3101. If you have done another trigger will be for line 7, right, for delinquent facilities. So again, we go back and forth on those reservations that were made in PS 3101. And this is sort of like a method of being able to check, yes, it's a neglected facility. Okay, so depending on how you are servicing this facility and providing Title I A services, it needs to cross-check with the PS 3101. A pop-up box explaining what are the sort of like the what happens next if the answer is no will be provided, and this is what it looks like. So when the facility says I don't want to be involved, or the LEA says we're not going to service this facility, then we have sort of like the ramifications of what that will entail. So here you say, we see that it says if the facility has declined services, the LEAs that are one part in neglected share might be reduced by the amount generated by the facility. Remember that the student count that is provided through the ESSA 9000 or the ESSA 9010, that is sort of like what generates the annual count and then is used to generate the funding. Remember also that the neglected kiddos are sort of like embedded within your Title I Part A entitlement, and delinquent kiddos are true Title I Part D Subpart 2 funding. And I'll pass it on to my colleague, Nelly.
Thank you, Gerardo. So if you're required to complete this schedule, to follow up on the information that Gerardo just shared with you, some of your information will pre-populate based on your SC 9000, such as the local facility name in the second column, first column, second column. Anyway, the facility status would then also need to be indicated if the facility is new or closed. And just if it's closed, were services provided in the current school year? If an agreement with facility has changed and the facility isn't in use anymore, please just mark it closed. Next, you'll need to indicate the facility type, neglected or delinquent. Under the participation columns, excuse me, you'll want to indicate yes or no for Title I Part A for both neglected and delinquent facilities. If the response is yes, You'll indicate whether services are provided through LEA reservation or campus allocation. And if the response is no, the declined services box should be checked, indicating that the facility has declined services under Title 1A, as Gerardo previously mentioned. For both neglected and delinquent facilities, something must be indicated under the Title I Part A participation columns, even if it's just to decline the services. In our reviews with the post-award compliance team, no response to the Title I Part A participation was one of the most amended items needed. For a delinquent facility, you're also going to select yes for Title I Part D, Subpart 2. If you're reporting on a neglected facility, the Title I Part D, Subpart 2 boxes will be disabled. Also, for delinquent facilities, the written agreement column should have a current date, and the written agreement assurance box should be checked. The written agreement date should be before the submission of the application. Now, in this example, this facility is a pre-populated facility, and it's a neglected facility being served with Title I Part A by LEA reservation, so an amount should be reserved on line 3 of the PS 3101, and Title I Part D, Subpart 2 is grayed out because it's a neglected facility. This facility is a pre-populated delinquent facility. They will not be served with Title I Part A funds, so the declined services box is checked under the participation for Title I Part A, and yes is indicated for Title I Part D, Subpart 2 funds. The date the LEA verified the October count for Title I Part A or Title I Part D, and the date the delinquent facility signed, excuse me, the date the delinquent facility signed the written agreement for Title I Part D only must be prior to the application submission date, even if you're asked to amend later. And the date of the written agreement should be the most current. Finally, the written agreement assurance box should be checked on the far right. And the last example I want to share with you is if you want to add a new facility. Under the local facility name column, the new facility name is manually entered. In this example, it's a neglected facility. The new facility will be served with Title I Part A with an LEA reservation, so the Title I Part D, Subpart 2 questions are disabled. And because the LEA has indicated that it will serve the new facility through an LEA reservation, this will prompt the trigger validation to enter a reservation on the PS 3101 on line 3, and then click the Add New Facility button to save the entry.
Thank you, Nellie. Now I'll be talking about PS 3103, Title I Part C, Migrant Education Program. First, we want to talk about PS 3103, schedule and general instructions. Just know that this schedule is required if Title I Part C funds are budgeted on Schedule BS 6001 from the program budget summary. General instructions that if on the application designation certification form for the ESSA grant, you applied as a fiscal agent or you applied at own for Title I Part C funds, this schedule must be completed. Just going back to previous discussions about the application designation certification form, the ADC, in Part 1, you're going to select the appropriate designation. Either you're going to apply on own as an independent project district, you can apply as a fiscal agent as part of an SSA, or not apply at all. That would be a non-project district, or apply as a member of an SSA. That would be an SSA member district. Please note that the previous Part 1 consultation, that has been removed from the application because this is going to now be captured on the 25-26 PR 1200 Title I Part C compliance report. So looking at now Part 1, required program activities. When you're looking at this, you are to check each box to indicate your organization's acknowledgement of compliance with carrying out the required activities. Now, since all these activities are required of all MEPs, you must check all active boxes before saving. If all checkboxes are not checked, an error message will appear stating that all required program activities must be checked. The LEA is responsible for incorporating the migrant education program activities, services, the plans, the guidelines into a migrant-specific section of the district improvement plan and updating it yearly. The activities listed in this section are required activities for all Title I Part C programs in Texas. You must maintain documentation of these activities for auditing and monitoring purposes. And please note that additional requirements will be provided in the program-specific provisions and assurances. Now we're going to talk about Part 2, Priority for Service Action Plan. As a reminder, Priority for Service PFS migratory students are defined as migratory children who have made a qualifying move within the previous one-year period and who are failing or most at risk of failing to meet the state's academic standards or have dropped out of school. And please note that the students are flagged according to information that is encoded into our database, which is the TXNGS system. So you are to check the box to indicate your organization's acknowledgement of and compliance with carrying out each required activity in this section. If the box is not checked, an error message will appear stating that the item in the Priority for Service Action Plan must be checked. In addition, in providing services with Title I Part C funds, LEAs shall give priority to PFS migratory children with MEP funds before using migrant funds to address the needs of other migratory children. Not only must services be offered to the PFS students first, but LEAs and ESCs must follow up with these students to ensure that they're indeed receiving these services. And services being provided must meet the actual identified need of each PFS student and not just provided for the sake of providing the service. Just a few reminders. Line 1, develop a PFS action plan. It must explain the criteria for defining PFS and include timelines and objectives. In line 2, you have include the Priority for Service Action Plan in the District Improvement Plan. Then you have run the PFS report from TXNGS system on a monthly basis to identify who the PFS children and youth are and to give them priority access to the MEP services. Here we have Part 3, Plan Supplemental Activities. You are to check the box to indicate the planned activity, the type at each grade span. If no activities are planned due to justifiable circumstances, then you can mark NA and provide an explanation in the box provided. If no box for any of the grade spans are checked, an error message will appear. When marking the planned supplemental activities in Part 3, please consider the fidelity of the activities as intended in our state service delivery plan. These activities can be supplemental instructional services, summer programs, or supplemental support services. Some of the supplemental instructional activities can include, for example, for early childhood through kindergarten, what you can have is you can have home-based programs for children ages 3 to 4, supplemental support by a teacher for eligible migratory pre-kindergarten or kindergarten students performing below the expected level of development. For grades 1st through 5th, supplemental instructional services such as tutorials, for example, extended day tutoring in the core content areas, extended day state assessment tutorials, reading instruction by a teacher, math instruction by a teacher. For grades 6 through 12, we're looking at instructional services that can include educational support, such as training and support to eligible migratory students on how to effectively use reading or math resources and tools. You can have extended day statewide assessment tutorials, reading instruction by a teacher, math instruction by a teacher, or even credit accruals such as distance learning coursework. Then we're looking at supplemental activities for summer programs. We have Project SMART, which is the state initiative for summer school for grades K through 8. And it should be utilized when providing summer supplemental services in mathematics to eligible migratory students. And/or supplemental support services, for example, providing clothing, providing access to health, nutrition, social service providers, or providing migratory families with necessary educational supplies. That's all I have for PS 3103. Now I'll hand it over to Gerardo. Thank you.
Hello again, long time no see. And I am the Title II Part A Program Director as well, so I'll be walking you through the PS 3104 also with my colleagues from the Postal Work Compliance Unit. So the Title II Part A program schedule is relatively simple. If you remember earlier, we thought Didi to cover REAP and transferability. So if it's 100%, the checkbox at the top will be active. All you have to do is check, we move on. However, for anything else, we have sections A, B, and C. So section A is for REAP information. This is data, is read only, and does not adjust the total allocation. For section B, this is your transferability, and at this point, it's also just read only. Section C is where most of the items from you guys will be taking place. And this is for planned uses of funds based by area of focus. And just remember that all Title II Part A activities should fall within one of the areas of focus, which are listed in section C. So just to dive into it, we have items 1, 2, 3, 4. Items 1, 2, 3 are your areas of focus, and we'll talk more about line 4 in a couple more slides. Essentially, what happens is that, remember, as I keep mentioning, Title II Part A activities must fall between one of the areas of focus, which is either line 1, 2, 3. And based on the USD monitoring that we went through, we had an action requested. And so at that point, there's been an added assurance for professional development, educator, and growth that my colleague Nelly will go over.
Thanks, Gerardo. So under Part C, planned uses of funds by area of focus, at least one activity must be indicated. If PMPs are being served with Title II Part A funds as designated on the PS 3099, then line 2, professional development and educator growth, is the only allowable use of funds for serving those PNPs. And if professional development educator growth on line 2 is selected, then the grantee must select the new supplement not supplant assurance radio button and complete the Title IIA professional development educator growth worksheet or an equivalent. You're being asked to assure that Title IIA funds budgeted for professional development are supplemental and do not include state-required PD. You're assuring that you'll complete the Title IIA Professional Development Educator Growth Worksheet or an equivalent prior to submitting the grant application, and you're assuring that you will maintain the completed worksheet and the applicable supporting financial records and provide them if requested by TEA. This worksheet is associated with the newly added Title II Part A Supplement Not Supplant validation. Oops, too far. Okay. This is an example of the new Title II Part A Supplement Not Supplant worksheet for professional development activities. At the bottom of the worksheet, there are 4 different tabs. There's a guidance tab, required professional development plan tab, supplemental professional development plan, and an example tab. This worksheet is available on the post-award compliance webpage, as well as the Federal Fiscal Compliance and Reporting Work App dashboard at the top link. And the bottom link is live directly to the Title II Part A Supplement Not Supplant worksheet. So those are both live links. Keep in mind that you're going to complete the application as per usual. With the new assurance on the PS 3104, again, you're assuring you've completed the Title II Part A Supplement Not Supplant Professional Development Worksheet or an equivalent. You're keeping it locally and that it'll be provided upon TEA's request. I can tell you that the worksheet will be requested by the post-award compliance team if the grantee is part of the newly added 10% random sample being validated in March of 2026. And just to reassure you all, there is a training that will be provided by the post-award compliance team on June 10th from 12:30 to 1:30 on utilizing the Title IIA Supplement Not Supplant Professional Development Worksheet. The date and time in this slide is a live link to register for this training. All right. For the Title II Part A Supplement Not Supplant Professional Development Random Validation, a communication will be sent out in January of 2026 to the 10% random sample of grantees with specifics on the newly added Title II Part A Supplement Not Supplant Professional Development Random Validation, and training for that validation process will take place in February of 2026, with TEA's validation process taking place in March of 2026. This slide offers links to certificate renewal requirements for several positions that may be helpful to you when completing the worksheet, as well as the Title IIA programmatic guide.
All right, thank you, Nelly. I appreciate you. So now let's dive into, now that we cover line 2 and more in depth, let's talk about line 3, which is evidence-based activities. Here we have, in the past, when it comes to evidence-based activities, what we have seen is mostly used for class size reduction. So if you are conducting an evidence-based, just keep in mind that evidence-based means there's research attached to it. There's different levels of research, which is low, moderate, and exceptional. And there's more information on that on the program guide and the non-regulatory guidance for Title II Part A that we have on our Title II Part A TEA webpage. So if you want some light reading about how this research present, there's some resources for you as well. Line 4 has been just a little bit of a mix, and that's because in the past, we have had other allowable activities as a line 4. And based on what we have seen in the last few years, as we pull data from what you guys have inputted into that field box, what we see is sort of like this more need for a more specific line and description of it. So as a reminder, as I keep saying, if there's anything you want to remember from our talk today, is that all activities must fall within the areas of focus, one of the 3 areas of focus. So that makes basically only one other thing that's allowable, and that's the administration of the Title II Part A program. Direct administrative costs will be considered allowable as long as the amount is reasonable and necessary as per your local policies and procedures. And with that, I'll pass it on to my colleague, Ricky.
All right, thank you. Okay, all right, so I'm going to go over the Title III, Part A, PS 3106 for ELA. Okay, so when you get here and you are filling this out, there are 3 parts, okay? And we're going to look at the first one, which is letter A. So letter A is talking about the supplemental activities that are going to be supplemental above and beyond of those that you are already doing to oversee, implement your state's mandated bilingual education program models. And that's going to include all 6, the 2 DLI, dual language ones, the transitional bilingual, and then your ESL, which is your content base and your pullout. So we're thinking about above and beyond leveraging your Title III funds. So after you complete your needs assessment, you're going to go here into letter A, and you have 8 different options. Okay. Now, to kind of help you understand the difference between number 1 and number 2, because I get this question a lot, because you have to select at least one of the options within 1 and 8, through 1 and 8, okay? But how do you know if you're selecting number 1 or number 2? Well, number 1 is one that you would select if you are transitioning your bilingual education program and you are, in a sense, building ahead the runway, knowing that we're going to be changing and enhancing our program model. So say you are implementing a content base and you've now hit the threshold to be required in the future to offer the bilingual program. Well, you can go ahead and start leveraging your funds to build capacity before you get to before you're required by state policy to implement. You start building that capacity ahead. Okay, so number 1 is selected if you are going to be planning to change your program model. Number 2, you would select if you are not changing, but you're going to be enhancing what you're currently offering. Now, it is possible for you to select 1 and 2, because I know some of you all, for example, maybe implementing a dual language program, maybe in your primary elementary grades, and you are not yet implementing into your secondary, so you're offering, say, ESL. So it's possible you're still enhancing your dual language program at the elementary, but then you're sustaining your ESL at the secondary, which would require you to most likely check both 1 and 2. In the next section, which is going to be letter B, addresses the supplemental engagement components within Title III. We know in statute we have the 3 engagement components. We have parent engagement, family engagement, and community engagement. So these are going to be those activities that are above and beyond other local state funded engagement activities, but also recognizing for Title III, these engagements should be truly tied to linguistic development, supporting families in that way. Now, all boxes must be checked in this particular section. because it is required of all those who have applied for Title III funds for the ELA. It is one of those requirements you have to complete. So in a sense, this is more of an assurance just to remind you that 1, 2, and 3 all need to be completed during this academic year. So once again, these are above and beyond and should be meeting the linguistic needs of your identified emerging bilingual students. Now, going into C, I'm actually going to pass it over to my colleague, Nellie, to walk us through the professional development piece.
Thanks, Ricky. So just as I shared in the previous slides for Title II Part A, for Title III Part A, ELA, a supplement not supplant assurance has been newly added under Part C, Supplemental Activities Professional Development. The LEA must select the newly added Supplement Not Supplant Assurance radio button and complete the Title III Part A, ELA, Professional Development Activities Worksheet or an equivalent. You're asked to assure that Title III Part A ELA funds budgeted for professional development are supplemental and they don't include any local, state, and/or other federally required PD, professional development. You're assuring that you will complete the Title III Part A Professional Development Activities Worksheet or an equivalent prior to submitting the grant application, and you're assuring that you will maintain the completed worksheet and the applicable supporting financial records and provide them if requested by TEA. Again, this is an example of, well, not again, because the first one was the Title II Part A Supplement Not Supplant Worksheet. This is the Title III Part A Supplement Not Supplant Worksheet for professional development activities. At the bottom of the worksheet, there are 4 different tabs: guidance, required professional development plan, supplemental professional development plan, and an example of how to complete those. This worksheet is available on the post-award compliance webpage, as well as the Federal Fiscal Compliance and Reporting Work App dashboard through the first live link, as well as a link directly to the Title III Part A ELA Supplement Not Supplant Professional Development Worksheet. Things to think about. You're going to complete the application as you normally would. With the new assurance on the PS 3106, you are assuring that you've completed the Title III Part A Supplement Not Supplant Professional Development Worksheet or an equivalent. You're assuring you're keeping it locally, and you're assuring it will be provided upon TEA's request. The worksheet will be requested by the post-award compliance team if the grantee is part of the newly added 10% random sample being validated in March of 2026. Again, I want to reassure you all that a training is going to be provided by the post-award compliance team on June 10th from 1:45 to 2:45 on utilizing the Title IIIA Supplement Not Supplant Professional Development Worksheet. And the date and the time in the slide is a live link to register for this training. As for the Title III Part A ELA Supplement Not Supplant Professional Development Random Validation, a communication will be sent out in January of 2026 to the random sample of grantees, and training for that validation process will take place in February of 2026, with TEA's validation taking place in March of 2026. This slide offers live links to several resources that may be helpful to you when completing the worksheet, such as a FASRAG, the Supplement Not Supplant Handbook, and the Title IIIA English Language Acquisition, Language Enhancement, and Academic Achievement Act. Thank you, Ricky.
Thank you. All right. Okay, so for you all who happen to meet the eligibility because you have reported a significant increase of students who have met the definition as an immigrant student, you potentially are eligible for additional Title III funds, which are awarded through the Title III Part 8 immigrant. And so that is going to be PS 3114. Now, like I said, for you who are completing this, still based off of a needs assessment, because we're still thinking above and beyond. I do want to say that, we see here there are 7 radio buttons that need to be selected. You are going to have to select at least one here because there's not an option of an NA under letter A, okay? So there are 7 supplemental activities, but keep in mind that many of our students who do meet the definition as an immigrant student potentially are dual identified also as an emergent bilingual or an English learner. So when we are supporting with supplemental activities already through your Title III ELA, it's also good to think about those students who may already be receiving those supplemental activities, then what are the additional activities when completing this schedule? So once again, something has to be selected out of letter A, one of these radio buttons. Now, when you get to section B, which is very much parallel to the ELA side, this is referring to your engagement component under B here, still supplemental above and beyond. Now, if you have been able to meet the needs of families through your ELA for the majority, say all of your identified immigrant students are dual identified also as an EB, then it's possible that you could select number 4, which is NA, as in there's no need to expand any of these funds for this because it's being met through your ELA schedule. Now, letter C, you can see that there are, once again, above and beyond supplemental activities and supporting personnel who have been trained or being trained to provide services to immigrant children and youth. Now, there are 2 targeted personnel here. We have teachers and paraprofessionals. Now, you take each row and we go, for example, teacher. There is the column of recruitment, the column of training, and then you have the column for NA. So if you are not planning to expend based off of that needs assessment, any funds on recruiting specialized personnel who have been trained to help support teachers, then supplemental teachers, supplemental staff there, then you would then select, for example, NA if that's not the need. But then you look at paraprofessional, you look at that row, and you go through each of those columns again. So, for example, maybe you are going to be spending funds for recruiting paraprofessionals who specialize in a need for immigrant children, maybe a particular language, then you would check that off for this particular one. Now, if you see and you look at this screen, you'll see that there's an NA for B and there's NA options for letter C. So it's possible that you selected all your NAs in B and C, but that is why letter A, if you recall, there was not an NA. So because there has to be something, a supplemental activity selected on this schedule between A, B, and C. Okay, if not, you'll receive an error and won't be able to move forward. But once again, thinking about your needs assessment, what do you need that it's already above and beyond, even for those who are dual identified through your ELA? All right, passing it back to you, Jaime.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Lenitra reporting back. And this afternoon, we're going to start off with the PS 3107, which is the Title IV Part A program, Student Support and Academic Enrichment. For the PS 3107 Part 1, we have the planned use of funds. In this area, the districts will check the first box at the top to say if the LEA has redirected 100% of its Title IV funding or not, using the REAP or funding transferability. If the LEA elects to use the REAP flexibility from 2A funds or to redirect Title IV funds, the amounts will be pre-populated on this schedule. And so you will not need to you're not able to make any changes to Part 1A. And so for Part B, you will have the current year allocation of funds, into the entitlement plus any of the funds that LEA is either transferring in or transferring out of the funding transferability for Title IV. I'm going to stop for a minute and turn it over to Dee Garcia to talk about REAP and funding transferability.
Thank you, Lenitra. I'm going to further explain what Lenitra said on the REAP and funding transferability. On Part B for funding transferability, the current year allocation of funds is the current year allocation as it's shown on your BS 6001. And then you've got the transfer in and transfer out from Title 4A and into either transfer in from Title IV or transfer out of Title IV. So that is what the next two lines are. Then you have the total allocation and transfer amounts. And that amount includes all the transfer in and transfer out into Title IV. And that is what is going to be used for the thresholds for the second part of the schedule. But one thing I want to clarify for funding transferability is how it actually works. For funding transferability, the amount that is allocated on your budget schedule stays with Title IV, even if you transfer, let's say 100%, or any amount that you transfer out of Title IV or into Title IV. And you budget that total allocation on your BS 6001. You know, when you are actually, the intent and purpose of how you use the funds is what's a little bit different. On the expenditure side, you will budget everything with Title IV. Any reporting expenditures stay within this program. The same thing with Title II. What is different is how you use the funds. So if anything is transferred, for example, if you transfer out of Title IV into Title I, which is the most common, those funds now become Title I. But for reporting purposes, they still remain with Title IV. It's the use that transfers to Title I. Therefore, those funds are being considered for reservations. They are also being looked at for carryover in the next year to see whether or not you meet the 15% allocation, the 15% limitation. So it is only the use that transfers, and for funding transferability for both like Title I and Title IV, they also now take they are now bound to the requirements for the program that the funds are transferred to. So if you transfer into Title I, then Now those extra funds now take on the requirements of Title I. The same thing with Title IV. If you're under the, say, the threshold for Title IV, that 30,000, then if you transfer money into Title IV, the system will look at that total allocation and transfer amount. So that could push a district either above or below the threshold. So that's all I have to say about funding transferability. Anitra?
The information on funding transferability. Okay, moving back to the PS 3107 schedule, Title IV. This is what you'll see for Part 1C. On this part of the section, the plan use of funds, the LEA identifies which areas it plans to use the Title IV Part A funds in. And if it's for administration, there is a cap of 2%, a direct administration for the Title IV program. If the LEA has at least $30,000 of an entitlement for Title IV, they must select and enter the activities for safe and healthy students, well-rounded education, as well as supporting effective use of technology. So those districts would have a percentage of funding in lines 2, 3, and 4. When it comes to line 5, that is a technology infrastructure. And for Title IV, regardless of your Title IV allocation, the LEA may not use more than 15% of the amount that has already been indicated in line 4 for technology infrastructure. On Part 2A, this is our comprehensive needs assessment assurances. And so for a district that has an entitlement that is greater than $30,000, they must select box 1, which is stating that the LEA has conducted a comprehensive needs assessment, and it has that needs assessment on file, it's documented, it's dated, it has the required stakeholders for the Title IV program that have provided input. If the entitlement is less than $30,000, then the LEA is not required to have a comprehensive needs assessment, even though it is highly recommended. However, they are still required to consult with the stakeholders on determining how they will prioritize the Title IV use of funds. And just as a reminder, the LEA must keep documentation of the comprehensive needs assessment and the stakeholder meetings on file locally and available in the event that there is a request by TEA or auditors to provide that documentation. For Part 2B, this is the area in which all districts that have that Title IV entitlement must assure that the distribution of funds have been prioritized. And in the Title IV statute, it lists the areas of that an LEA must prioritize the distribution of funds before those funds could be used for other programs and services. And so here you see just a snapshot of some of those prioritization requirements, and the full document is for prioritization is posted in our Title IV FAQ document online, as well as the program guide. But the LEA must assure that the distributions have been prioritized and check the assurance box. And then they need to ensure that the activities has identified the following. It must be reasonable and necessary to carry out the purpose of the program, considered a priority to address the schools with the greatest needs, be measurable, designed to have a positive impact on student achievement, and be supplemental to other non-federal programs. So going into this new school year, you must ensure that anything that is a state mandate as of September 1st, the district will not be able to use any Title IV funds for that particular service that may be related to Title IV program areas. For Part C, the district must ensure that the Title IV funds are supplemental and not supplanting any of those required state mandates. So the district must select both boxes and ensure that it's being supplemental with the use of funds. For parts D, E, and F, those are additional boxes where the LEA that has that entitlement of at least $30,000 or more, they must select all three because they must have activities and programs that are represented through the three content areas that you see here. However, if it's a district that only has that has less than a 30,000 entitlement, they are only required to select one area of focus. However, they can still use all three areas, but for those with a $30,000 entitlement, they must have programs and activities documented for all three areas and select all three assurance boxes. And now I'm going to turn it over to Title I.
Okay, thank you, Lenitra. Okay, I'm going to talk to you about the WV 4001 schedule, which is related to the Title I Part A carryover waivers. This schedule is a little bit different from the others because you won't be dealing with it on your original application. It only comes into play after carryover amounts are calculated and released, probably in February of the next year. So you probably won't be dealing with a schedule at all until February or March of 2026. The other difference about this and the other schedules is that this schedule is usually started by grants administration staff. So let me talk to you a little bit about those situations. So there's a provision in the Title I statute that says that not more than 15% of the Title I Part A funds that the LEA receives in any fiscal year can be carried over into the next fiscal year. So that's where the 15% limitation comes from. The statute says that the state can waive this provision once every 3 years. So that's where the frequency of the statutory waiver comes from. So once every 3 years, the LEA can carry over more than 15% of its current year entitlement. There is an exclusion from this. The limitation doesn't apply if the LEA gets less than $50,000. So if the LEA is receiving less than $50,000 in Title I Part A funds for the fiscal year, then it doesn't have to worry about the 15% limitation. Where the LEA does need to realize is that if it's transferring funds in from Title II or Title IV, and it has less than $50,000 in Title I funds, those additional Title II or Title IV funds that are coming into the Title I program through funding transferability could push the LEA over this $50,000 limit. So it could make the LEA have to worry about whether it needed to apply the 15% threshold. So the procedures for this, make my cursor to behave. The procedures for this is once the Title I final amounts are determined and the LEA can figure out what 15% of that is, then we will know whether or not the LEA is carrying over more than that amount from the prior year. If the LEA is eligible for the 15% limitation for the waiver for that, the LEA is going to get a survey from TEA to complete. The superintendent will be sent a survey via the email. And the survey will ask questions like, does the LEA wish to request a carryover waiver for the full amount of the funds that are available? And the LEA will be asked for at least one justification for the reason why the carryover funds exceeded the 15%. And then they will be asked also to identify what at least one option about how the LEA plans to use those funds and how they're going to reduce the carryover so that in future years they will have less than that amount. So once the LEA submits the survey, they'll get a confirmation that we've received the survey and that it's been complete. And then the LEA will be instructed to start an amendment to complete the WV 4001 schedule. So you would need to say in the purpose of the amendment that you're budgeting the carryover funds, and then the amendment will stay in a draft status while TEA completes the WV 4001 schedule for the LEA. Once that's done, the LEA will then get another email letting them know to go ahead and budget those funds and to complete the submission of the amendment. So that's for the statutory waiver, the once every 3 years waiver. If the LEA is not eligible for the statutory waiver, meaning that they used it last year, so they can't use it this year, they can't use it next year, TEA will look at whether the LEA received an increase in its Title I entitlement amount between the planning amount and the final entitlement amount. If the LEA got an increase between the planning and final, then the LEA would be eligible for an EdFlex waiver for the statutory limitation. And in that case, the grant staff would then initiate the waiver schedule in the consolidated federal grant application and would note that it would be an EdFlex waiver as opposed to the statutory waiver. But in either case, TEA would be the one to instigate the waiver request. And now I'll turn it over to